Now, 1 year ago, Illinois lost 5 good people in a horrific act of violence. Many others were seriously injured, including law enforcement that bravely responded to the scene. The deceased perpetrator, whose name deserves no further mention, was able to obtain a FOID card and a firearm 6 years ago by unlawfully lying about his criminal record. And because there are over 7 million firearms ownership prohibiting records in this country which are not readily available in background check databases. Now, when the perpetrator submitted fingerprints in an unlawful attempt to obtain a concealed carry license, the Illinois State Police firearms analysts were able to link those prints to a Mississippi conviction which prohibited the perpetrator from owning a firearm, resulting in a denial of that concealed carry license and a FOID revocation. As has often been the case since the decades that the FOID law has been in existence, the disposition of any illegally possessed firearms was not determined by any level of law enforcement. Regardless of reviews of firearms laws and policy, we know it is simply a matter of public safety that firearms should not be in the hands of those who have been barred by law from possessing them. There are over 2.2 million FOID card holders in this state, and last year the Firearms Services Bureau, under the new Division of Justice Services, received over 300,000 new FOID applications and renewals, over 42,000 address changes, over 386,000 firearms transaction purchasing inquiries, and reviewed on average 220,000 newly submitted records from sources across the state and country matching FOID card holders. On average, 90% of new FOID applications were processed within 30 days. That was done with 13,877 hours of overtime. Over many years, the fund supporting the background check process has been affected by budget crisis after budget crisis, and in turn, that has affected stable hiring and program build-out. This administration has committed to stability in that fund, allowing the ISP to build out multi-year hiring and service plans. Keep in mind, that is to improve the background check process. That is not for the essential element of enforcement. This background check process has fallen to the Illinois State Police over the years, in large part because no matter your view on this issue, the ISP can be trusted to provide answers and facts to policymakers and citizens alike with integrity. In the wake of the heartbreaking events in Aurora, the Illinois State Police responded with an unprecedented level of transparency, candor, and action. Because a form letter sent only at the time of revocation is not enough, we committed to sharing FOID revocation data with any law enforcement agency at any time. That is done. We created a web portal accessible by any criminal justice agency in this state at any time. Over 600 departments and criminal justice agencies have signed up for access to this portal, to date. Because a form letter with minimal details is not enough, we committed to providing greater detail regarding revocation so law enforcement can prioritize threats. That is done. FOID revocation data on the portal now includes the reason for revocation, such as a new offense, a new conviction, an order of protection, a mental health prohibitor, or clear and present danger prohibitor, as well as associated firearms transaction histories, so law enforcement can triage based on intelligence that indicates the threat for violence, not an action against an individual who simply failed to renew or moved out of state. Since its creation, with detailed revocation data, there have been over 13,000 inquiries on the web portal. We also committed to improving enforcement, not focused on an invalid piece of plastic called a revoked FOID card, but on the disposition of firearms by those banned from legally possessing them. And enforcement has improved. Since May of 2019, the Illinois State Police Division of Criminal Investigation, using gun liaison officers and firearm investigative units, have conducted over 200 FOID revocation enforcement details all across the state. Revoked FOID card returns have increased, but more importantly, the submission of the statutory means by which we determine the firearms possessed by a revoked person are legally disposed of firearms disposition reports, or FDRs, has increased over 100%. As of today, Firearm Services Bureau records indicate 2,111 FDRs were submitted to the Illinois State Police in 2018, and 4,562 were submitted in 2019. By any measure, that is an improvement. Other types of enforcement beyond firearm disposition reports has also been fruitful. Last week, an individual under felony indictment was arrested after he attempted to buy a handgun. The subject was then charged with unlawfully attempting to purchase a firearm, a Class II felony. This and similar cases have used FOID revocation data, been investigated by the Illinois State Police, and charged by state's attorneys of DuPage, McHenry, Lake, and DeKalb counties, and there are ongoing efforts to develop cases such as these in many other counties around the state. Though compliance with FOID laws does not always result in criminal charges, the goal is to keep guns out of the hands of persons prohibited from having them. In May 2019, the Illinois State Police Firearm Services Bureau received information from a public guardian's office that a person who was a ward of the state had a FOID card. That person was adjudicated by a court as mentally defective, intellectually disabled, and failed to notify the Illinois State Police. After learning the information, the Illinois State Police Firearm Services Bureau immediately revoked the person's FOID card, notified our Firearms Investigative Unit, determined the person purchased a handgun in March of 2019, and was approved to purchase a rifle 5 days before this investigation was initiated. The Firearms Investigative Unit contacted the gun dealer, stopped the sale just hours before the person arrived to make the purchase. The Firearms Investigative Unit was able to make contact with the person, recovered his handgun, ammunition, and FOID card. Earlier this month, the Firearm Services Bureau received information that a subject with a FOID card voluntarily admitted himself to a hospital for a psychological exam. The FOID card owner worked at an elementary school and sent a text to the spouse stating somebody is going to die. The subject's FOID card and CCL were revoked. Investigators interviewed the subject, who cooperated, surrendered their FOID cards, CCL, and most importantly, their firearms. This person is now in mental health treatment. These additional details and enforcement efforts have been done with existing resources that in some situations take from other law enforcement efforts and are separately resourced from that background check process. There is also currently no source of support for local law enforcement agencies to support this mission. With the resources we have, the Illinois State Police are prioritizing investigations and enforcement actions among the average 10,000 revocations a year to minimize the chances of these subjects doing harm, as does local law enforcement agencies. That total revocation number should tell us something loud and clear, though. Even with the incredibly hard work of the men and women in justice services, and with the incredibly hard and sometimes dangerous work of the men and women serving in the Division of Criminal Investigations, there is still much more to be done. The ISP is trusted to provide facts and information to policymakers and citizens. Without additional resources for both state and local law enforcement to ensure illegal firearms are not possessed by potentially dangerous individuals, the odds still remain too high that more tragedies will occur. Senate Bill 1966, has as many different names, is on concurrence in the state Senate. That bill will provide additional resources necessary to sustain and improve our efforts, to improve our access to fingerprint-associated records across the country, and to support local law enforcement's ability to accomplish this public safety mission. The victims and survivors of Aurora deserve our honesty and our best efforts, and the Illinois State Police are committed to nothing less. With that, if you have any questions that can help clarify any of those points. Yes, sir.
Quoting from an article here, it says nearly $30 million in funds generated by the user fee that could have reduced the wait time for FOID cards have been used for other purposes by the state.
Sure.
Do you say that, hey, we ought to have that in a lockbox? And if you do have those funds not being swept, Do we need to increase the money?
So the funds, as I mentioned in my comments, I just outlined how that process has worked. And yes, over the years and multiple administrations, the funds that were in that particular fund have been swept for whatever reason through various budget crisis after budget crisis. What I can tell you now is in this current fiscal year and the fiscal year going forward, that this governor's office, that Governor Pritzker has made sure that those funds are stable, that they have not been swept. And what that is allowing us to do is to improve the effort that we have when it comes to that background check process, meaning the applications, the renewals, the concealed carry license, all the many duties that the legislature has prescribed to the Illinois State Police to do when it comes to FOID. Those funds, as they are stable and as they are reliable, they will be used to improve that background check process. But those funds aren't anywhere near what we need to be able to improve the enforcement process.
Have you put together a budget and itemized how you're going to use these funds if you were given them so that you could
Yes.
accomplish
So
your
we
goals?
have a three-year, multi-year hiring plan to hire additional firearms analysts. That's part of the biggest challenge that we have is getting those people, having that head count there that's stable and reliable. It's very hard to plan for how many people you're going to be able to have in the Firearm Services Bureau if you can't rely on those funds actually being there. Now that those funds have been stable, the Division of Justice Services and the Firearm Services Bureau, which is under Division of Justice Services, has a plan. They're investing as well in additional services when it comes to call center, looking at how we can possibly put service centers in different places around the state. There's no reason it all has to be here in Springfield. Those funds will be more than accounted for as they are regularly expended and as that fund is stable, which allows us to be able to plan to use those funds. But that is, again, is not funds that are allocated for enforcement.
Are you saying, Director, the things that you've outlined today that have been done in the last year have been done with existing resources?
We've done this with what we've got now.
And then how, you know, you can blame budget crises,
Sure.
but Firearm
Yeah.
Services Bureau and overtime and
Sure.
delays
Yeah.
have been, your predecessor 20 years ago could have been talking about problems.
He might have,
Firearm
yes,
Services.
yeah.
So how much, the things that you say need to
Yeah.
be done, how
Yeah.
much more is it going to take?
In terms of the overall costs?
Money, yeah.
Well, I can tell you, to hire the head count that we need to be able to do all these functions, gun dealership licensing, FOID revocations, FOID renewals, new FOID applications, concealed carry licenses, to be able to also make sure there's no backlog in what we call correlations, meaning the thousands and thousands of records that are now coming in from all across the country and across the state. As the background check process improves, there's going to be more records to review. So as we get better, the problem actually gets bigger. So I will tell you that the amount of funds that are generated by that particular FOID fee that we're talking about, those will easily be used over that multi-year hiring plan. What we're talking about is making sure that the ISP, as well as local law enforcement, sheriff's departments, police, that they have the funds that we can give through grants, that we can fund various additional task forces, the overtime and other costs and manpower that come when it comes to enforcement. That will be well beyond what you would see generated by the Firearm Services
You
Fund.
mentioned local resources, no local resources.
There aren't. And what this bill, again, just being objective, looking at the facts, it will generate resources for us to be able to give those funds like we almost do through the statewide 911 process. There's a fee that's collected, we allocate, we just distribute that to various ETSBs. We would be able to do essentially that for the Illinois State Police, to give those to other local law enforcement agencies so they can have the resources they need to follow up on these revocations as well.
So you're
Yep.
advocating for Senate Bill 1966?
That's the position of the administration, is to support this bill, absolutely, yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
say to critics who say law-abiding citizens shouldn't have to show their fingerprints in order to exercise their constitutional rights?
So look, the question for us is, how do we make sure that there are individuals who may have a criminal record that's connected to a fingerprint, that we make sure that they don't get access to a firearm because they have a criminal record in their background? That's the question that we have to look at from a law enforcement perspective. The answer is, if you want to be sure of that, then we need to have that fingerprint. we will be able to do a much more thorough, effective, and quicker background check, even for law-abiding citizens, if we have that fingerprint. Now, as to the constitutionality and the policy and the politics of all that, that's not for the ISP to weigh in on. That's an issue that citizens and policymakers and others will debate. But if you ask us the question, will that help us get the job done better, having that fingerprint? The answer is absolutely yes. It is part and parcel of law enforcement. It's common sense that fingerprints catch bad guys.
Director,
Would
we have the White County.
Would you be doing drug tests as well for people applying for FOID cards? Because-
I don't believe that's
because
contemplated at all.
Cannabis is legal
Sure.
in Illinois, but it's banned federally. And
Understand.
people who use cannabis are considered prohibited from owning firearms.
I don't believe there's any discussion in Senate Bill 1966 or from anyone that I've heard that they're going to be doing drug testing.
Director, we have the lower case court out of White County that the FOID card is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Probably going to go to the Illinois Supreme Court. Why not wait before we gear up and tell people they got to spend a lot more money, millions of dollars,
Yeah.
to have a decision on that, because it could be that the Illinois Supreme Court throws the entire process out.
Well, if we made our decisions on how we operate from a day-to-day basis, on which way controversial litigation may go one way or the other, which could take years, then frankly, we would never make any decisions. So we simply have to be able to operate and make decisions based on the circumstances, and the law is as we find it now. If a court makes a different decision and makes a different outcome in terms of the validity of this law or that law, then as always, the Illinois State Police will adjust our policies and our practices accordingly. We're here to enforce the law, and the law is right now, is as it is, and we have to operate based on the law how it is today. So,
Can I ask, which may not be in your purview, but maybe it is. We have as I understand, a long backlog of untested crime rape kits and other
Yes, sir.
DNA. I can hear my friends who are gun owners saying, you want to spend millions of dollars to investigate law-abiding citizens. Why don't you seek the funds to go after get these evidence kits tested? We may be
Right.
releasing all the time out of prisons, or people who have stopped for traffic tickets,
Sure.
serial rapists or other murderers. Why not put our revenues there?
a little bit off topic, but we could have a whole other press conference when it comes to the forensics backlog, and I've had many opportunities to share with all of you here what we're doing when it comes to the forensics backlog, when it comes to biology and DNA. So there is a tremendous ongoing effort to bring that backlog down, and in fact, over the past year, the backlog has gone down almost every single month. It's down 16% where it was from last year. I'm all for catching as many bad guys as whatever way we can. That is a separate or parallel question from whether or not we also have a duty to keep bad guys from having guns and using whatever tools we have to be able to prevent that from happening as well.
To what degree is the Illinois State Police to blame for this gunman having a gun last year in Aurora?
Well, I think it is a systemic challenge, and all of law enforcement, we're part of that system, so we all have to continuously do better. We owe the victims our very best. We owe the public our very best. And as we see where there are loopholes or weaknesses in the system, whoever is responsible, if it's us, it's our duty to fix it. If it's someone else, it's our duty to help them fix it. So I think, as is well known, and as I mentioned at the beginning of my comments, there are 7 million estimated by both Democrat and Republican administrations, no matter where you are in this issue, 7 million records that are firearms prohibiting firearms ownership prohibiting records. It's a mouthful. That are not in an easily accessible database. And that is all over the country. It's within circuit clerk's offices. It's within sheriff's offices. It's within prison systems. It's within federal databases. It's within all types of sources of criminal records that should prevent people from having a firearm because they've lost that ability to do so because we've judged them to be someone who is not safe to have a firearm. That is everywhere. To the extent we have a duty and we have a role in fixing that problem, we're taking every action that we can with the resources we have to be a part of the solution.
Should the state police settle the lawsuit? I think there are 7 lawsuits.
Well, as you all know, any type of pending litigation, this is not the appropriate venue or place to be able to discuss that. Those are things that have to be worked out in a courtroom.
What guarantees, even if Senate Bill 1966 were to pass, that you guys would be able to manage the resources you get if we have a history of the Illinois State Police not able to manage the resources resources they have right now, leading to 60,000 delayed FOID card processing.
Well, I would-
dropping the ball on this Aurora shooter and following up on.
Well, I would say it's not the Illinois State Police that have not managed the resources well. In fact, we are very frugal and very diligent users of public resources. In fact, if you see why there are funds that get swept, because we are cautious about that. We spend them on things we need to. We have to make decisions based upon a stable budgetary environment. And when we are given that stable budget, when we are entrusted by the legislature and the executive to do a mission, and given what we need to be able to do that, we accomplish that mission, and there's no doubt about that the job gets done. So I don't have any doubt in our ability to use those funds correctly. It's more a question of whether or not that budget will be managed consistently and in a stable manner. I think we're finally seeing that in a bipartisan way. Some consistent, stable budgeting, which will allow us to be able to attack the problem.
So since the incident in Aurora,
Yeah.
multiple steps have been taken, working
Yes, sir.
collaboratively with local law enforcement. If those things are they working now to this point?
Well, as I just said, if you heard what I said, we've done 200 details. And the number of firearms disposition reports, meaning the report which says an individual who could not have a firearm is not allowed to have a firearm, those weapons have been properly disposed of, not seized by the Illinois State Police necessarily, but given to somebody who can safely and lawfully own them. That has doubled. That has increased by over 106% compared to what it was a year ago. So those efforts, those enforcement details, as well as the communication that we have and the information sharing we have with other law enforcement agencies is producing a measurable result. By any measure, that is an improvement. Is it good enough? Hell no. We still got to do a lot more. We've got to do a lot more work.
Your men and women are going out and taking the FOID cards away. Is that what you're saying? These
Well, as I said, we're not focused on getting a piece of plastic. That's, FOID enforcement is not, now, if someone has a revoked FOID and they go to a firearms dealer and they try to buy a gun,
Right.
the plastic doesn't mean anything because it's revoked. They run them through the system.
Right.
It's like an invalid driver's license.
Yeah, let me then ask about
Sure.
the
Yes, sir.
enforcement. Those 200 enforcement actions, those are
Sure.
different how than they were in the past? I mean,
They didn't exist.
Right, that's what I'm.
That's how,
okay.
yeah, they are new.
So until Aurora happened, you guys weren't going out and confiscating guns from people who shouldn't have.
Only incidentally, as part of other types of investigations would you come across that. That's why we have actually cases getting charged. That's why we have information that we're sharing with our federal counterparts in the event that there's a federal nexus. So these details are new. This is a new thing that did not exist. And what I think many people in law enforcement are realizing, particularly the investigators, is that this is just another tool to get bad guys. We're not focused on, some old fella who got his FOID not renewed, or some nice lady that moved to Florida and no longer has Illinois residency and therefore is revoked. We're focused on the person who had a recent firearms purchase and recently was charged with a nasty violent crime in their jurisdiction. That's who we're focused on, and that's what the effort has been focused on. But again, those details, as this concept, it didn't exist. So this is something new, and I think you can see it, again, the number of FDRs submitted in 2018 compared to this year, it's having some type of effect. But if you look at the gap between the number of people that are getting revoked and the number of people who have submitted firearm disposition report, there's still a wide gap. And that only comes with putting people to the work and making people do the work. That's the only way you do it. It's a tough slog. It's not easy, but you have to have the people to go out there and, hey, sir, you lost your FOID. You were just charged with a felony, or they go to the prison or they go to jail and ask, hey, you had a FOID and it looks like you bought 12 handguns last week. Where are they? Or going to their relatives and asking those things, doing the investigative work that needs to be done. It's painstaking, it's hard work, sometimes it's dangerous, but in the end, that's the only way you're going to close that gap. That's the only way you're going to strengthen that web of safety that is important for
But
people.
Director, what about the argument? How many people have been killed on the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago?
Yeah.
These are gang members. They're not going in for a FOID card. And so the argument...
Well, they are. Some are. So that's part of it. Now,
Do we have any
but
idea
those
what
two
percent?
things that you're saying are not opposed to each other. You need to go after people who are committing violent crime or threats to public safety, whatever veneer they may have, whatever label it is you want to get to give them, whether it's a gang member or whether it's someone who has gone postal or whatever, common nomenclature you want to give it. We have to protect public safety in whatever capacity we can. Those two things are not opposed to each other. And that's why you're seeing us develop cases and why they're prioritizing at the federal level. Recently, the Attorney General talked about it, those lie and try cases. There are people who have serious criminal records that will check the box on their form, and even in the federal form, it says, no, I'm not a felon, and I can't have a gun. And they try to get a weapon, and sometimes they're successful. Those are those lie and try cases, because there are people who will obviously present themselves to be something that they're not and try to get a weapon and try to hurt people.
How good are our current computer systems to compare databases so that you can flag these people as they're
Sure.
applying and go, you have a felony in Florida or similar state?
Well, again, that's what the whole focus of this conversation is about, the fact that so many of those things are being done and that their systems are processing a tremendous amount of records and correlating a tremendous amount of records. And frankly, the better we get at it, the better we get as a country at finding these records and making sure in the system, the more work there is to do to be able to make sure that people who are dangerous or have some other mental health issue don't have firearms. So that continues to grow, and we have to make sure that we're investing in the systems that have that growing capacity. The federal government is investing funding in it. We need to continue to do that here as well.
But isn't this the reason we have FTIP? I mean, shouldn't all this data be automatically for 20 years, 30 years, however long FTIP has been around?
Well, FTIP is just that process by which someone goes to a gun dealer, a licensed firearm dealer, and attempts to purchase a firearm.
But if FTIP says he's prohibited, he won't get it sold. And
That's correct.
Why isn't all that data that you said that's spread all
Yeah.
over these different databases all in one place?
Because you have 102 counties in this state, for example, and they all have individual record systems. And in every state in the 50 states in our union, they all have different record
They're supposed
systems.
to be reporting.
They are. And if you look at the mass quantity, many of them are being reported. But the percentage, the huge percentage that still are not finding its way into a system, which would find its way into a system with fingerprints, that represents that gap that's still there. And we've seen that in state after state, states that have excellent systems, states that have weak systems. You saw that when what happened in Texas, when you had someone who was in the federal database, the military database, because they had a conviction there, that was not fed into the federal system. All those things have got to be feeding into a database that all talks to each other, that we are part of, but we know there are gaps there. And so the question that's being posed to us is, how can we fix one of those gaps here in this state? And this is the answer we're trying to, frankly and candidly, and without regard to this issue or that issue, just give you, the policymakers, the facts about what could help.
The cooperation you've had with local governments
Yeah.
in this, going through the portal online and like raising flags or asking questions about this
Yeah.
individual and individual. Have you heard anything like blowback from the locals about, hey, we don't have the resources to do this? What kind of, conversations are you having with local?
That is a continuous issue at all levels of law enforcement, is always the resource issue. And this is a mission which requires some level of sophistication. There can be potentially dangerous situations. You could be dealing with individuals that have a predisposed issue with mental health. That's why they wound up on the list in the first place. And some departments have the reps, they have the practice, they do that fairly regularly. It's something the Illinois State Police is getting better and better at, and other departments are. Other folks, other smaller departments, whether it's in an urban area or rural area, that's something they don't have as much experience with, and we're happy to help them. But it is a matter of training, it is a matter of manpower, and they are reluctant to take that mission on, primarily because of the manpower issue. I think while there are different issues, or excuse me, different points of view around the state or in any household, frankly, at Thanksgiving about how you may feel about firearms, once you talk about, here's the resources we can give you. Here's why John Smith last week got his FOID revoked. That's a violent offense, and he bought 12 handguns the week before. That's someone we all agree needs to be getting a visit, and we need to inquire about where those firearms are, just in case. Someone who we know may be a perfectly healthy, great citizen, a very lawful gun owner who then has a mental health issue that develops over time, we want to make sure that they're not going to hurt themselves, they're not going to hurt someone else. Again, that requires a delicate, sophisticated approach sometimes, and that can be a challenge, and so we need resources for manpower and training to be able to do that effectively and safely.
Can I ask you two questions real quick?
Sure.
One,
Then we're going to surrender, but go ahead.
you're a law enforcement agency, right?
Yes, sir.
Should these funds for computers and upgrade and database operations be going to Do It, who are more computer geeks, instead of having to maybe do this service?
Well,
and have that system work? And then, and I also, it's off topic,
Yeah.
but about a year ago, we had shockingly, 5 officers hit by cars. We've been here
Yes.
before on that topic.
Yeah.
Have we seen any kind of an improvement over the last year? Have you seen the citizens on the highway pulling over more? If you could address that.
Sure. Do It is less an issue of who gets a particular duty assigned to them, more a question of systems. And we work with them on a daily basis. On anything to do with our computer systems, we're going to be interacting with Do It. So it's not like you can sort of separate those two things out. So by improving our computer systems, it's inherent that we'll be working with Do It. When it comes to the move over law, our efforts last year and that are continuing this year have, I believe, begin gradually helping the public understand the danger that men and women who are on the side of the road, whether in a law enforcement capacity or in an EMT capacity, or they're working on the roads to try to improve the safety of those roads. The danger that those men and women face is becoming more and more known to the driving public. The enforcement effort is part of that, though. Just like this issue, it's one thing to talk about education, it's one thing to have laws on the books, but until you do the enforcement, it doesn't have the impact that it needs to have. It's just like any of these issues where we are engaged. Education is important, drugs, et cetera, treatment is important, training is important, but without enforcement, you don't see a change in conduct. But I do think with the, 750%, or maybe that's even low, the amount of move-over violations that were issued, the 700% increase, massive increase, I think the public's beginning to get it. We did see a decline in the number of officers and others that have been injured, but we still have officers getting injured. It's still very dangerous work. And it, again, took 40 years to get people to wear seatbelts. It took a long time to reduce drunk driving. Mothers Against Drunk Driving did a lot of work on that, and it made a big difference with law enforcement. It will take time and persistence and education and technology to improve the enforcement of move over, which will protect our first responders.
Can you tell us which counties had the most details to get those guns in the last year?
Off the top of my head, no. But we can probably scrounge something up for you.
Appreciate that.
Anything else? All right, very good. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.